When people talk about regrets, they usually mean the little things: missed parties, skipped chances, words left unsaid. But over the years, I've realized that life doesn't keep score on the small moments. It saves the real regrets for the very end, when you're lying in a bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing the clock is running out. That's where my story begins, not at the end of life, but at the beginning of an understanding that would change mine forever. I was 34 when my father, James Porter, called me to tell me he had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. He was 66, strong as an oak, and still working in his small-town hardware store in Virginia. He had never been one to dwell on emotions, so when his voice cracked over the phone, I knew it was serious. I dropped everything, left my life in Boston, and drove down to see him. When I arrived, my father was sitting on the porch, rocking slowly in his favorite chair. His hair had thinned more than the last time I'd seen him, and his hands shook when he lifted his glass of iced tea. Still, he smiled when he saw me. "Ethan," he said, his voice soft but steady, "I think I know the two things people really regret on their deathbed." I laughed nervously because it felt too soon for that kind of conversation. "Dad, you're not going anywhere yet." "Maybe not today," he said, "but time's not something I can bank anymore. And you're still young enough to listen and do something about it." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas. He finally turned to me and said, "The first thing we regret is not loving enough. And the second? Not living enough." At first, the simplicity of it felt underwhelming. But in the weeks that followed, as I stayed to care for him, those words began to take root in me like seeds. My father had spent his life as a provider. He'd married my mom at 24, raised me and my sister, Emily, and built his store from the ground up. But after my mom passed away when I was in college, I realized he'd been living with a quiet loneliness he never spoke about. Still, he kept working, kept paying the bills, and kept showing up for everyone except himself. One night, about a month after I arrived, I found him sitting in his recliner, staring at an old photo album. In one picture, he and my mom were in their 20s, laughing on a beach in North Carolina. They looked alive, vibrant, and full of dreams. He traced her face in the photo, then looked at me. I should have told her I loved her more. I thought she knew, and she did, but I could have made her feel it every single day. I wasted time thinking there'd be more of it. That was the first regret: love unexpressed. It wasn't just about romance. It was about showing gratitude to friends, telling family they matter, making sure the people in your life know their worth. The second regret came up in an unexpected way. One afternoon, I suggested we drive out to the mountains, the ones he used to take us to when Emily and I were kids. He hesitated. "I've got so much to do at the store," he said. But then he chuckled. "What am I talking about? I'm dying. The store can wait." We drove for hours, windows down, letting the warm air whip through the truck. When we reached the overlook, he got out slowly, leaning on me for support, and looked out over the rolling hills. "I used to think I'd travel the world," he said quietly. "But there was always another project, another customer, another reason to put it off. Now, the farthest I can go is here." It hit me then that was the second regret. Not living fully. Not chasing the dreams, not taking the trip, not starting the project, not saying yes to the adventure when you had the chance. Over the next few weeks, we started doing the little things he'd always put off. We visited an old fishing spot, had a cookout with neighbors, even took a short road trip to Nashville because he'd never been. He couldn't walk much, but he said it didn't matter. Just being there, seeing new things was enough. One night, sitting by his bedside, I asked him if he was afraid. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "I'm not afraid of dying, Ethan. I'm afraid of not having lived enough before I got here. But you still have time. Don't make my mistakes." My father passed away in late autumn, with Emily and me by his side. In his final moments, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Love more. Live more." Those were his last words. After the funeral, I went back to Boston, but nothing felt the same. I kept thinking about all the ways I had been living on autopilot, working long hours, neglecting friendships, postponing travel plans, telling myself I'd have time later. I realized that later was a dangerous word. So I started small. I called friends just to tell them I appreciated them. I visited Emily more often. I told the woman I had been dating for months that I loved her, even though it scared me. And I booked a ticket to Italy, something I'd dreamed of for years but always delayed. On that trip, standing on a cobblestone street in Florence, I felt my father's words in my bones. Love more. Live more. I understood then that it wasn't about avoiding death. It was about making sure that when the end came, you could look back and know you had given your heart fully and embrace life's opportunities without fear. Now, years later, whenever I meet someone stuck in the grind of someday, I share my father's lesson. I tell them that when you're lying on your deathbed, you won't regret the mistakes that embarrassed you, the awkward conversations, or the risks that didn't work out. You'll regret the times you held back love because you were afraid, and the times you let life pass because you thought you had more time. I keep his rocking chair on my porch now, and some evenings I sit there, watching the sun set over the horizon. I think about him, about my mom, about the life I'm still living. And I know that when my time comes, I want to leave with as few regrets as possible. Because in the end, my father was right. There are only two things we'll regret on our deathbed: love we didn't give and life we didn't live. And if we can get those right while we're still here, then maybe, just maybe, we can meet the end with peace.